This presentation is about the bioeconomy and the emergence of artificial fish protein. My name is Dr. Rob Burton and I'm the leader of the project Protein 2.0, looking at the arrival of synthetic proteins in Norway. The first issue we have to introduce is the question of what is a bioeconomy. Many people think a bioeconomy is simply a continuation of agriculture, fisheries and forestry. But the reality is, a bioeconomy is a completely new economic sector based on the use of transformative biotechnologies to process biomass. Goodman et al. In 1987 suggested that there were two types of transformative biotechnology. The first one is appropriation biotechnology, and the second one is substitution biotechnology. And I'm just going to explain briefly why these are different. The appropriation type bioeconomy. The word appropriation, it means to take over. And in appropriation, the biotechnology appropriates, i.e. takes over, parts of the value chain. You still retain the farm to fork nature of the value chain. Still the same components are there, but effectively it's been improved. The technology is making parts of it more efficient or cheaper. And this is arguably the type of bioeconomy that the Norwegian government is proposing. So this is what appropriation looks like. Here you have the sort of standard production system for salmon, but contributing to improvements in the value chain are factors like biotechnology, improved medicines, biotechnology involved in genetic improvements, biotechnology used for greenhouse gas emission reduction, the production of salmon feed, for example, from biotech, and extended preservation techniques. This is the type of bioeconomy that the OECD and many countries envisage is going to happen. As the OECD said in 2019, there will be widespread benefits such as low carbon economic growth, the preservation of natural resources, restoration of the environment/ecosystems, more sustainable food systems, the development of rural areas, and it will create employment opportunities. So all in all, this type of bioeconomy is seen as being a very positive event. However, the substitution bioeconomy is somewhat different. Now, this is effectively technologies that have emerged only within the last couple of years. So when the government was writing its biotechnology strategy in 2016, this really wasn't part of the picture. The term substitution, substitute, means to use in place of, and in this type of a biotechnology, what happens is rather than complementing the production system, helping it, it takes the end product, produces it in an entirely different way, cuts out the value chain, and you end up with a substitute product rather than assisting what's being done traditionally. And this is a massive and disruptive change to the system, effectively removing the need for existing biomass producers. So this is an example of potential fish substitution. Instead of actually having the fish growing in the pens up until the salmon stage, you have the production of stem cell lines by biotech, the production of serum or nutrients for the cells to grow in. You have to exercise the cells, so you need to build muscle, and therefore you need the technologies to do that. You might need an engineer instead of fish farmers, and then you need technologies to 3D print the tissues. But you can end up with an end product, i.e. salmon, which is more or less the same as the product that you would grow naturally. So just to look back at appropriation, as you can see, it's a very different value chain, much more complex, and many more jobs would be held within an appropriation type bioeconomy. So this is something that we should be concerned about. But the question is, how far are we towards a substitution bioeconomy? As it's only a recent event, many people don't actually realize that this technology exists or how far it's actually progressed. So let's have a look and see what sort of products are available to begin with, or companies are working on. So we have beef, which is a very common one. Milk is also a common one to work on. There are a number of companies working on the production of fish, including salmon. You have chicken production, fur production, which is a protein, and the production of pet foods and other products such as that. And this is a small section of the types of startups that have begun. When I started looking at this process about 3 years ago, there were 20 plus startup companies. There are now 50 plus, and we're beginning to also get other companies that are emerging to support them by producing other parts of the value chain. The most frequent methods for production, first of all, is fermentation. And this is effectively like brewing beer. So you might take a cow, take a sample of the genes that produce the proteins in milk. You put the genes into a yeast, and the yeast goes into the bioreactor. You add water, sugar, leave it to ferment, and then out the bottom comes a pile of protein that's identical to the type of protein that's produced by the cow. This can then of course be turned into other products like ice cream in this example. The other method is the cellular method. Again, we have a bioreactor. We take a cow. This time you take cell samples from the cow. You put it in the bioreactor. You add a serum to feed it. And you add a scaffold on which the cells can grow as they replicate to give it structure. And then you need to exercise it in order to get the fibers to grow. And then ultimately you end up with something like this. This at the moment is the earliest type of technology. There are now technologies that are being developed which enable you to get products that are much more like meat in appearance. A recent move has been towards the cellular production of milk proteins too, which is where you take animal cells, you grow the animal cells, and the animal cells effectively lactate to produce milk. One company is working on that at the moment. The arrival of these type of products on the market occurred last year. In July 2019, Perfect Day put out a brand of ice cream to test how the market would respond, and in general the market was actually very positive. They sold out 1,000 tubs of ice cream within 24 hours, and this was something that actually contributed them to them being able to raise a significant amount of funding to progress into full production. They sold the ice cream at $20 per pint plus shipping, which is a lot. However, just searching on the web, I found there are other ice creams at $18 per pint plus shipping. So although we're at the premier end of the market, this is not necessarily out of the range of normal products. And since then, the company claims that it's reduced the cost significantly. So in the future, it should be selling for between $10 and $12 per pint. The CEO says, once we're at full scale, our process actually allows us to make these products more affordably than animal-based dairy. And this is a general claim for all of the synthetic protein companies. Just to run through the progress of Perfect Day, it began in 2014. It teamed up with a major company, Archer Daniels Midlands, which deals with proteins. In February 2019, it raised $34.5 million. Then July, the first synthetic product for sale. November 2019, they announced that they're now developing a yeast that can produce milk fat as well as protein. 2019 in December, they raised $140 million to expand production. In May 2020, they obtained generally regarded as safe status in the US from the Food and Drug Administration, which means they could sell the product. May 2020 again, they immediately signed a deal to provide protein to Smitten ice cream. In July 2020, they raised another $160 million to expand production. And by July 2020, they announced that their production costs met the 2022 targets, so they've reached profitability. And when you think of companies like Tesla that have been going for a lot longer and haven't reached profitability yet, that is a staggering result. But how does this relate to fish? How far are we towards substitute fish products? There's a few companies working on this, and I'll just go through three of the main ones. Wild Type was founded in 2016 and is producing salmon or seafood. The funding that it's achieved so far is $16 million. It has only 2 employees and is located in San Francisco. So this company effectively is trying to produce its product to compete on the salmon market. Finless Foods, on the other hand, is targeting bluefin tuna. It started slightly later. It's raised $3.5 million, has 11 employees, and is based in San Francisco. It is yet to release a market date, and from what I understand of the company, I think they are struggling to produce the serum that they require to produce the fish. It nevertheless imagines that it will have a product within the next 5 years. Probably the most advanced company is Blue Nalu, which was founded in 2017, has achieved funding of $24.5 million, and it works on producing general seafood. It's got 6 employees, is located in San Diego, and has a market date initially of 2021, where it plans to produce mahi-mahi in California. So other companies that are emerging in the fish sector, we have Seafuture in Canada, Shock Meats in Singapore, Avant in Hong Kong, and Art Meat in Russia. So there's a number of companies and recent companies too that are beginning to work on the fish area. So why is fish likely to succeed? I'm just going to go through a few points here. But the first is that there's a huge difference in finfish, mollusks, and crustaceans' suitability for culturing. In the case of beef, for example, there's no choice because there's only one animal, but in the case of fish, you have a huge variety of species that you can choose, and some of them will be easy to copy and some of them will not. The second point is that there's many overfish species that are highly valuable and have good quality flesh, and there's no difference to copying those ones than there is to copying a cheap product. In comparison, if you look at beef, chicken and pork products, they're all of the same price. This means that fish may be able to be marketable, profitable, before a similar product that emerges from the meat sector. Third point, you can enhance the qualities of the fish, for example by adding omega-3s that have been produced also synthetically. Fourth, the regulation is likely to be easier with fish in America in particular, where a lot of these products are being developed, mainly because the United States Department of Agriculture, which is a strong supporter of the conventional meat sector, is not responsible for regulating the fish. Fifth, mercury and microplastic are not going to be a problem with these synthetic fish, although they're an increasing problem with wild-caught fish. Sixth, it's ethically sound. You cannot argue that the ethics of the product are sound, because there's no bycatch, there's no illegal fishing, there's no overfishing, there's no slave labor. You know exactly where it comes from and how it's been treated. 7, fish can be produced close to the consumers. Rather than producing them 3,000 kilometers off the coast, they can be produced 20 kilometers or right next to the main populations. 8, you can produce species that are difficult to farm otherwise. So whereas you have no option in terms of growing these commercially, if you can't catch them wild, it may be no problem to produce them in a synthetic process. 9, there's unlikely to be that much consumer resistance as there was with genetic modification because there's no genetic engineering involved in the product. 10, you can produce cells that meet the definition of immortality in fish. the fish cells are actually better to replicate than animal cells because they can be replicated more times before dying off. And 11, the fish flesh structures are actually easier to copy than animal flesh. With beef, for example, you have to put fat running through the meat, which is difficult, whereas with fish you have the muscle blocks that are relatively easy to copy. Of course, there are negative aspects too, and one of them is that most of the work has been done on mammals. So a lot of research needs to go into fish cells before it's actually ready for market. There are some other developments in the area of fish with regard to fish feed. In August of this year, Calista, for example, announced the construction of a 100,000 tonne per year fish feed factory of waste CH4 to protein via bacteria in China. So this is taking effectively industrial waste gases and turning it into fish feed in extremely large quantities. Novo Nutrients has been working on similar technologies, although in this case it uses carbon dioxide again as a waste from factories in order to produce fish food. It's opening up a factory in California and plans to take on Asia and Europe at a later point. In the case of Calista, British Petroleum has become a partner in this, and for Novo Nutrients, Chevron has become a partner. And this is important because you can imagine if it becomes a common means of, if it proves to be economically viable to attach these kind of feed factories to oil refineries, for example, then you could have a massive influx of fish feed to the market in a relatively short period of time. So what's my best guess for the future? Well, I think within 2 years we're likely to see fish products on the market in the US. This is a matter of getting past the regulator. And again, I know for the synthetic meat proteins, companies have approached regulators in Europe and it's going through the process in Europe. So we should probably also see fish products on the market within 5 years in Europe. How long will it be before it's truly competitive? Well, it's difficult to say. The companies are very optimistic, but one of their biggest problems is, well, the two problems, one is the production of the serum, which is very expensive at the moment, and the second one is that there isn't the bioreactor capacity to produce it in bulk. Nevertheless, I think within 10 years, you're likely to see lab-grown fish to be cheaper than conventional wild-caught fish, particularly if wild-caught fish becomes increasingly expensive. And in terms of providing serious competition within the wild-caught fish sector, I think you're still talking of 20 to 30 years because, again, the bioreactor capacity is simply not there at the moment. The companies are a lot more optimistic than this. The companies think that within a decade they'll be able to achieve a relative amount of competition, but I think that is currently quite an optimistic perspective. In terms of Norway's salmon industry, I don't think they're likely to be seriously affected at first because, as many of the CEOs of these companies note, the salmon are already an extremely efficient fish in terms of making protein. And when you have synthetic fish feed coming in bulk from oil refineries, for example, you may find that it becomes even cheaper. And I think the biggest risk to the salmon industry in Norway is that the share of the salmon, the market share of salmon declines as you get, for example, tastier fish species emerging and the production processes for synthetic fish improve.